the very last line of this morning's gospel is, "You are my witnesses." You know what a witness is? You watch these police dramas on television. We see witnesses called for to testify to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And Friday evening, I was happy watching the evening news. And there was a story there about a man who was walking along some street. A car came along, hit him, and killed him. The driver of the car got out, had a look at the man. Then he got back in the car and drove off. The police are now looking for witnesses, people who saw the accident, saw the man look at him, get into his car, and drive off. And hopefully that man will be caught. So we all know what a witness is. There's a wonderful book by a former coach of Baylor University called Jeff Taffet. And in this book, he tells a wonderful story about a brilliant athlete called Brian Siedenberg. Brian, in 1963, University of, I can't remember now which one, Washington, he was the number one high jumper in the world. And he was also America's most gifted athlete on the trampoline. And then this coach is having breakfast one morning at the university, and he's going through the morning paper, and he sees this headline: Eric Steinberg injured. And then it describes what happened. Brian had been working alone in the gym. He did a triple somersault and came down on the trampoline off-center. His neck hit the edge of the trampoline, snapping it and leaving him totally paralyzed. Able to move only his eyes and his mouth. Brian was left a helpless, hopeless cripple and a very bitter young man. I think we can understand his bitterness. And now we move on 5 years. There's a convention of coaches and athletes in Estes Park in Colorado. Coaches from all over the country. There is one chair on the stage, just one. And the lights are turned off. And all of a sudden, a projector turns on to see Brian winning the championship as the best in the world. And at that point, a large football player called Wim Weimer appears along the stage, and he's carrying something like a rag doll. The arms are flipping around, the legs are flipping around, and he places the rag doll on the seat and putting pillows around him to keep the rag doll from falling. The rag doll, of course, is Brian Steinberg. And Brian then, in a very harsh voice, announced to all these athletes and coaches, "My friends, I pray to God that what has happened to me will never happen to one of you. I pray that you'll never know the humiliation, the shame of not being able to perform one human act. I pray to God you will never know the pain that I live with every day of my life. It is my hope and my prayer that what has happened to me would never happen to one of you, unless, my friends, that's what it takes for you to put God in the center of your life. If that's what it takes to put God in the center of your life." Brian, in his younger days, was a very different young man. In fact, the quote says, "The thing that caught my eye was his poise and confidence and the fact that he never smiled." Word around the university was that Brian was the most selfish, self-centered young athlete to come along in a long time. And now, because of getting to know the Lord Jesus Christ, he was transformed from a selfish, bitter young man to a wonderful messenger of what the Lord had brought about in his life. In other words, a wonderful witness. Brian testified to the presence of God in his life, not by telling the story of the Lord Jesus. I mean, anybody can do that. Nor does he testify to the risen Christ. The soldiers at Calvary, that's what they did. They told the story of the risen Christ. But witnessing is demonstrating in our lives, as it did in Brian, that the effect of the risen Lord had on his life, that changed him from a very selfish and bitter young man to a wonderful witness. I've probably told you this story before, but one of my great admirers, I admire most of all, is Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer was a theologian, a parish priest, and a concert pianist in Paris. And yet he gave all that up, that prestige and power and money, and he went to French Equatorian Africa. There in the town of Lambarene, he opened a hospital and spent the rest of his life taking care of the sick and the poor. Truly a real witness of the risen Christ. And on one occasion he said this: "As I look back upon my youth, I realize how important to me was the help, the understanding, and courage so many people gave to me. But they never knew it, nor did I perceive their help at the time." I probably told you this story before, but it's one of my favorite stories because I heard it from the mouth of the person when I was a seminarian in Ireland. From time to time, we would have a guest speaker. And this Friday evening, the guest speaker was the former editor of the Daily Worker in London. The Daily Worker, of course, was the communist paper. And so he said, every evening as I left my office, I had to pass a Catholic church. And I always wondered, what goes on in a Catholic church? So one evening, as it's getting dark, he decides to go inside. He sits in the back pew and he sees all these strange things that one found in a Catholic church 60 years ago. The altar pegged against the back, where the priest would say Mass facing the altar. Then there was a communion rail, and there would be a white cloth which you held under your chin to receive communion to prevent it from falling on the ground. And then there would be a statue of Joseph, or the Sacred Heart, and on the other side there would be a statue of Mary. And as he's looking around at all these strange things, the door opens, and this young woman comes in. And it's very obvious from her face that she's deeply troubled. So she genuflects, and then she begins to walk up the church. And when she genuflects here, and then she walks over to where there is a statue of Mary, the Mother of God. She kneels down, prays for 15 minutes. She gets up, lights a devotional candle, comes to the center, genuflects, and then rather quickly she walks down the aisle. But the thing that struck this man, Douglas Hurd, the editor, was the transformation in her face. The pain and the concern, the worry was all gone. And she walks down the aisle rather quickly, opens the door of the church, and disappears into the London night. And that good woman never knew the impact of her witness that evening, the witness of her Christian faith in the risen Lord, the faith that she had to believe that the Mother of God could help her. And of course, she did. That was the story that he told us that evening in that Irish seminary. The steps later on, he could never forget what happened. And it bothered him. What happened over there in front of that statue that brought about such a transformation in the face of this young woman? And it bothered him so much that 3 months later he knocked on the door of the rectory, talked to a priest, and had taken the first step of becoming a Roman Catholic. She never knew the impact she had made on the biggest fish in London, the editor of the Communist Daily Worker. The gospel says today, you are my witnesses. You are here this morning. Why? Because you are witnesses. You are witnesses to members of your own family, perhaps who don't go to church. You are witnesses to the people who live on your street or your block or your apartment house. You are witnesses to your Christian faith this morning. But it doesn't end here. It doesn't end here. At the end of the Mass, the deacon will announce to you to go forth and preach the gospel. In other words, he's saying, go forth now and become the witnesses that the Lord wants you to come by the way you live your life. If you're going out to IHOP this morning for breakfast, you can be a witness by the manner in which you treat the waitress. You go to Publix, the manner in way you treat the person who's checking you out. Perhaps you took somebody to church this morning. You were witnessing to Christ. Maybe tomorrow you'll take some elderly person to the doctor. You are witnessing to the risen Christ. The various ways in which we are called to be witnesses to the Lord. And so when the deacon sends us forth this morning, let us go forth enlightened by God's word, nourished by his blessed sacrament, and become true witnesses of the risen Lord.